My daughter called me the other day from college, all upset, excited, nervous. I don't know what she was, but she said, Dad, there's this big group of furries that are just walking around on campus. And me and my friends, we pulled up and made sure to take photos. And the only thing I could think to ask her in the moment was, well, are they walking on two legs or four? Like, how deep is this delusion? Now, for those of you that don't know what a furry is, I want you to meet Boz. Boz is not a furry, he is a dog. But I have included him in this video purely for clickbait purposes so that you'll like this dog because, well, people like animals. Thanks, Boz. So, a furry is a human who dresses up and acts like an animal. My mom, a boomer, was very concerned when I told her all about furries, and even I, as a Gen X, have my concerns. But then, depending on who you talk to, some furries, I don't know, they may think that they're actually an animal. I think in most cases, they just kind of identify as such in some way, shape, or form and dress up like them and act like them. It's kind of like every day is Halloween, I guess, or maybe actually on Halloween they put on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and dress up as a human. I don't know exactly how it works. I do know that most of us find this strange, including myself, to be honest. But rather than devolve into mere judgment, I think a more helpful question to ask is how did they come to define themselves in this way? Or how did this become a part of their core identity? And then zooming out from our furry friends, as the Who asked, a really good question: who are you? And that's the topic of today's video. Who are you? What is your current identity? And what can you do if you're having an identity crisis? Now, before I get into that, let me just share a couple shameless plugs. Number one, if you like this content, please like it, share it, and subscribe to the channel. And number two, in early 2025, my first book is dropping, and I'm actually going to include 2 chapters on identity. One I've already written, one is in development, and there's going to be lots of other interesting things. So if you want to keep up with that project, then please sign up for my newsletter. I'll put the link in the description of this video. Now, back to our topic. Have you ever had an identity crisis? Humans are fascinating creatures because we're the only animals on the planet who stop to consider who are we and what is the meaning of life all about, right? You never see like a honey badger curled up in a ball, struggling, having an existential crisis, just trying to figure out who it is and what it's all about. But as humans, we're very different creatures. When we struggle with no longer feeling like we know ourselves, or we can no longer define ourselves in relationship to the people and the world around us the way that we used to, it really gut punches us. So we wrestle with those things to the point of sometimes turning so inward that we can kind of lose our moorings, like we're peeling away layers of ourselves like an onion that's just kind of keep peeling away to the soul, and it all ends in tears. Or sometimes we just adapt to the environment that we're in and we listen to the voices around us. We let them tell us who they think we are, and we believe that. Or in some cases, we borrow or adopt an identity from someone that we admire or find interesting or think that is cool, or whatever the case may be. In the course of my own life, I have adopted many different identities and different stages of my life. At one point, I was the Joker. I don't mean Batman's arch enemy, but I will say that he is one of the coolest comic book villains ever. I've been the comic guy. I've been the Star Wars nerd. Later on in life, I was the metalhead. I was the friend of Marilyn Manson. That is an interesting story. I'll link to that video in the description. I was the heroin addict. Years later, I was the Christian. I was a husband, a father, a church planter, a pastor. Now, in all of these things, there was a struggle to kind of comprehend who I am and how do I relate to this world, to define my place, my personhood, and my peer groups. And as I look at those latter identity markers that I mentioned, that takes me to my most recent identity crisis. You see, my identity crisis had nothing to do with my core identity as a follower of Jesus. I will say that is and has been for many years my true north. And there are things that I believe are true of me, things that I believe are true of you and the world around us, because I have this clarity in my primary identity. And I'm so thankful for that. But my identity crisis started just over a year ago when I left the church that my wife Rebecca and I planted in 2005, and I was able to pastor for 18 and a half years. And I had planned to be there until I retired, but circumstances changed. And my family left. We left for good reasons. I'll get into that probably in another video. But it was hard because we loved this church. We loved these people. We loved our community. We loved our home, our neighborhood. We loved what we did. And all of a sudden, it was all gone. So now I find myself in my 50s, no longer serving as a pastor, no longer connected to the friends that I had spent years building relationships with, no longer doing the purposeful work that I had done, and no longer being known or being a part of the community. And so I no longer related to the world around me as I did for over 2 decades. And in fact, the world around me changed as I moved 1,200 miles away into a new location. And the thing is, I still don't know exactly what's next. So I have been working through this sort of identity crisis. Who am I? What do I do? What's next? What does that mean for me in this next season of life? And we'll get to the solution side in a minute. But for now, here's what I will say, is I don't think that I'm alone in all of this. I bet you can relate to maybe it's now or at least some season of your life wrestling through your own identity crisis. And I'm certain that at some point, and look, your circumstances were probably mine's a unique story. Your circumstances were probably a lot different than mine, but something changed for you in some way. Maybe it was taken from you, or something happened and it caused you to consider, who am I really? Maybe you've hit a key age, 18, 20, 30, 40, 50, above, and that's causing you to kind of think through some of these things. Maybe a big part of something you built your identity on is no longer there, it's gone. Or maybe it has been exposed as something not really worth building a life on. Maybe you've been listening to some external voices that are calling you and trying to imprint their idea of who you should be upon your impressionable, vulnerable soul, and you're getting confused, wondering, maybe they're right. Again, maybe you just realized that it is a good existential question to consider, who am I? And yet you don't really have a good answer, at least not now. You look in the mirror and you ask this reflection, this stranger sometimes, is this the person I want to be? And maybe you say, here's how I've been defining myself. It's kind of in this way. But then you also have to ask, is this the way I want to define myself going forward? Now, for those that you can relate to this, you've experienced this, or maybe you know someone who has or is, whatever the case, I want to give you 3 steps. And these are ways that you can discover for the first time, or perhaps rediscover who you really are. The first is examine to see if you've settled for inferior core identities. When we started our church in 2005, we made a strategic identity decision about the church. Organizations can have identities just like individuals. But we decided, because our goal is to help people discover Jesus and to grow in their faith in Him, and what we noticed then, and it's only gotten worse since then, is that many people and forces or organizations were trying to co-opt the mission of the church and move it in their direction for political purposes. And the result of that is that many churches end up being used to accumulate or fortify power, and then mission creep sets in, and the church is no longer on the mission that it set out to be, and it's serving some kind of other purpose. So we declared, and we repeated regularly, that we were an apolitical church. That doesn't mean that we hate politics or politicians. It doesn't mean that we didn't think that individuals should be involved in the political process. We think you should. It meant, though, that as a church, a higher value for us was to create a space where people could come together and worship Jesus, regardless of how they think the world should be run. And we took a lot of flack for this. Interestingly, in the early days, it was the political right that tried to kind of push us into more political activism. And then years later, it was the political left that kind of put pressure to try to move us in that direction. And they wanted us to use the platform that God gave us for their purposes. But we pushed back hard, believing that the pulpit was to present the gospel, not the political issue of the week. And we lost some people along the way because of this, because we didn't kind of give into that. However, because we didn't let them shape the identity of the church into what they thought it should be, we were able to be who we really are. And I think there's a lesson in there for us somewhere. And we gained something else. You see, we gained a church where both Democrats and Republicans came together, united over something greater than their politics, their faith in Jesus. Yeah, maybe they argued over coffee about politics, but they learned to love each other regardless because of a greater identifying factor. And that is the power of staying focused on identity. And so this brings me to what I think is one of the biggest inferior core identities out there, and that is politics. If your core identity is built around politics, can I suggest you're settling for less? And I don't say that in a condemning way. I had to confront this in my own life that, well, I am passionate. I have opinions about politics, probably like you have opinions about politics. But I realized too much of my identity was built on that. And so I had to kind of repent. I had to step back and just say, this needs to be put in its place. And listen, if you're settling and this is your core identity, can I just tell you that you're setting yourself up for disappointment, defeat, and delusion. Yes, politics matter, and you probably identify more with one party than the other, like I do, but it's a shallow thing to give up the essence of who you are to advance the power of ambitious men and women in our world. And so, and when I look at it, it breaks my heart to see people so entrenched in this that they disown their parents, their relatives, their friends, all because they vote differently and they feel justified in doing so. And guess what? If that's you, I'm going to suggest that you had a stolen identity. So then the question is, how do you define yourself then? Is it your color, your gender, your class? Is it your hobby, your abilities, your profession? That's where my breakdown happened. I allowed too much of my identity to be shaped by serving as a pastor, that when that was gone, I felt lost, and I knew better. I knew you shouldn't build your identity on that, and I thought I hadn't done that as much, but I did, and that's the crazy thing about identity. It can creep up and become part of you and what you define yourself as, even if you aren't realizing the extent that you're doing it. So what about you? Are there things that you have in your life that may be good things, but they're not core things, but they're defining you in a core way? And maybe you need to reorient them. Maybe you need to reprioritize them. Sometimes we just need a simple reminder to get back to what it's all about. One of the greatest examples I saw of this was at a Metallica concert, Gillette Stadium in Massachusetts. It was a great concert. James Hetfield, the singer of the band, at one point, he just stops because, you know, in that time, especially, and it's probably only gotten worse, there's a lot of pressure on musicians and artists to use their platform for politics or agendas or whatever purpose, some good things, but typically divided the crowds, and they weren't having any of it. So singer James just gets up in the middle of the show, stops, and he says, "Hey, how many of you guys like rock and roll?" And everyone's like, you know, we love it. "How many of you guys like Metallica?" And of course, I was just there to protest. Anyway, I'm just kidding. I like their music. But as he said this, he says, "Great. You all like rock and roll. You like us. That's what we're here for. I don't care who you vote for, what you eat, what you do in your bed." And he just kind of went down this whole list of he's like, "I'm not commenting on this. We're here to have fun." And as simple as that sounds, it was like a bold statement of declaring a simple value of what we're all about. Now, I think we would probably all agree that rock is also not a great core identity. So let's discuss that too. The second thing when you're having an identity crisis is define and decide your true north. If I were to ask you, what is your truest self? What would you say? Do you have a core identity that the rest of you is built on top of? Look, just like when you lack core physical strength, it impacts your entire body and your abilities. And so forth. When you lack core strength in your identity, it impacts your entire being. So stripping away the second and third layers and beyond of whoever you are, we'll come back to that shortly. Who is at the center of you? Like getting to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop. Who is that? And listen, if you can't answer that, then we've hit the root cause of your identity crisis. Because without this core identity established, nothing else that you slap on top of to identify yourself with will make sense. It'll be like an ill-fitting outfit that you're covered, but it's not really, everyone knows it's not quite right. And so when you think about this, if you don't have that, you'll also be easily influenced by others who wish to create you in their image. And look, this is your responsibility to figure out. But I'm going to tell you my core identity, and I hope you'll explore it because I believe it could and even maybe should be yours. But let me tell you, as I said earlier, humans are unique creatures. We're the only ones who pause from things like eating, procreating, seeking shelter, like all the other animals do, and pause to ponder our existence and even panic over who we are and wrestle with these things. And I believe that's because, and not simply that we're smarter, it's because we were created imago Dei, in the image of God. Now, this image has become distorted in us. It's become corrupted. It's been painted over through sin and brokenness in our world, but it is our core identity. And Jesus, who my core identity is built on, offers a way back. Having in love died for us in our place, and then rising from the dead in power, demonstrating that this resurrection, this life, this newness of life is available for all. And so as I wrap myself in this core identity, it helps me to make sense of the world around me, my own life experience, my circumstances, the good, the bad, the ugly, and it helps me to embrace the things that I can't find anywhere else in life, like redemption, unfailing love, an origin story, a future hope, a moral compass to guide me, a presence that's stronger than me, guiding me and empowering me from within, and so much more. So some of you have this, you have your core. But again, if the problem is, if you've let one of those other identity lenses become your primary and your core gets kind of pushed out somewhere else and becomes subservient to these second or third layers of identity, then that's backwards. And eventually you'll find yourself confused, disillusioned, disoriented. And that's why we have to take the next and final step, and that is to deconstruct and reconstruct your identity from that core. I'm not going to spend as much time here, but this is probably where you'll need to spend the most personal application time. If you've inventoried your identity and found that you're not defining yourself by and living from your core identity, maybe having instead placed some good part of you, some lesser identity above it, then you'll need to disassemble and reassemble who you are accordingly. Look, if you share my core identity as a Christian, here's an exercise that I think will help you. Open your Bible and learn more about your identity, and then write these things down on a list. I suggest Ephesians chapters 1 through 3 is a great place to start. There's other great places, but find what that is. Write those things down. Learn about who God says you are. One of the things you'll see in Ephesians 3 is that you are God's masterpiece. You are a poem. You're not a piece of work, but a work of art. You are treasured by God, and the more that you allow God to strip away your false self, this veneer that's around you, these lesser identities, you don't actually lose the person you are. You become more of the person you are because the image of God is revealed more clearly in you. Now, I said, I think it was Ephesians 2, but Ephesians 2, Ephesians 3, get in there, read it for yourself. You can correct me in the comments. But listen, write these components down, make a list, hang it up somewhere where you can see it and meditate it and remind yourself, this is who I am. Now, if you're not a Christian, you'll have to find another true north place. And I don't know what that is, but I believe there's some searching that you'll need to do. But listen, now that you've made your list, remind yourself, at the core, I am not a white, middle-aged man, although I very much look like one and am. That is not my core identity. You may say to yourself, I am not a black young female. I am not a teacher, a banker, a Democrat, a Republican. You may be all those things, but that's not your core. You can instead say, I am a blank, insert core identity who happens to be, and then you can fill in all those secondary and third labels. And listen, along the way, I'll trust that you're going to find some things that have been part of your identity that are not true about yourself. Things that are no longer, maybe once were, but are no longer true, and they're no longer healthy ways to define yourself. And it's time to discard those things. Maybe you've been defining yourselves by things like your hurts, your hangups, your habits, or maybe by lies that people have told you and that you've repeated to yourself to the point where you believe it's true and let it get inside of you and become a part of you. I'm going to suggest pull those things out mercilessly and discard those and embrace the things that are true as you build back up your core identity and who you are. And again, the rest is simply all the things that are good, all the things that remain, build that, find that order inside the core of who you really are. And I'll say this, whatever identity crisis you may be going through is an opportunity if you work it right. Now, I hope you find that this is helpful to you in some way. I'm going to unpack more of this in my book and maybe more in future videos. But thank you so much for watching, and may you be the best version of you.